Section 713 is really just an extension of the material that you learned in 712. And a great starting point for this lesson is to go ahead and start with drawing in the ASTC that we talked about on section 712. So again, just to fill this in, all are positive here, sine is positive here, tangent is positive here, and cosine is positive in quadrant 4. That means everything else is negative. So in quadrant 1, since everything is positive, everything here will have a positive fraction when we write the ratios out. So I'll just list those. And again, the reciprocals would also be positive. In quadrant 2, since sine is positive, that means everything else is negative. So that means your cosine and secant ratios are negative. That means your tangent and cotangent ratios are negative. And in quadrant 3, your sine ratios are negative, and it's cosecant. And the cosine and secant ratios are negative. In quadrant 4, sine is negative as well as cosecant, and tangent and cotangent are negative. So we're going to start with that. And at this point, it's really just the elimination game. All right, so if you look at question 1, it says the sine of theta is less than 0. And on the number line, if something is less than 0, that means it's negative. So when it says less than 0, I like to put a minus sign above it. And when it says greater than 0, I like to put a plus sign, indicating that it's positive. So the first question has a sine value that's negative and a cosine that's less than 0, which means it's also negative. So now, if I look over at our quadrants that we drew in, all I need to do is find which quadrant, 1, 2, 3, or 4, has the idea where sine and cosine are both negative. Quadrant 1 is automatically out. Quadrant 2 only has one of those negative, so that's out. But if you check out quadrant 3, on this question, sine and cosine are both negative. And so that means the theta has to be in quadrant 3. So this will just, if you don't want to do Roman numerals, you can just put the number 3, or you can use the Roman numeral. All right, let's do 1 or 2 more together just to make sure you got the hang of it. And I'm going to jump around a bit. I'm going to go down to number 7. All right, now, secant and cotangent, we did not list over here. But remember that secant really pairs up with cosine, and cotangent really pairs up with tangent. It's the same fraction, it's just been flipped over. So that means if secant is greater than 0, that means it's a positive value. And that also means that cosine would be positive. As far as tangent or cotangent goes, cotangent is less than 0, so that means it's negative, which means tangent is less than 0. So I'm going to look for these blue words that I just wrote down to see which quadrant that happens in. So I want to find the quadrant where cosine is positive and tangent is negative. And the easiest way to start is to always focus on the positive one and then go from there. So cosine is positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. So at this point, we've narrowed it down to 2 quadrants. But we need to make sure we pick the quadrant where tangent is negative. And as you look at the tangent values here, we can see that tangent is negative only in quadrant 4. And so quadrant 4 is the one that you're searching for on this particular question.